Two guys, one bench.
Shit talking. Strict sports. Combat sports. Over.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Two Guys, One Bench, where we're 650 fucking pounds of shit talking on a 30-pound bench.
Where we're talking more shit than Donald Trump when there's widespread voter fraud.
And that's a lot of shit talking.
They used to write nothing about me. Now I average probably about 4 or 5 stories a day on the front page. Someday they're going to give me a good one. Watch. He's a corrupt politician. You see it? Now they say the laptop, Schiff, watermelon head, Schiff. That laptop was produced by Russia. Here we go.
Combat sports. Resolute. Prepare yourself for battle.
All right, in combat sports on the weekend, there was a couple of awesome fights. Well, we're going to go over the performance of, a guy that's put on 5 wins this year, and he's starting to smash dudes that were top contenders. That is Kevin
Holland.
He's nothing too crazy. He looks pretty skinny and lanky, but god damn, does he have some power. What happened in the fight, Darrell? So
going into any fight, he was matched up against Jacare Souza, just so people who didn't know. The Gator is his nickname. Why? Because if he gets on the ground with you or grapples with you, you're fucked. Apparently, Kevin didn't get the memo and knocked this dude out from his back. I know that sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. You got to watch the highlight.
And not only that, he went to the ground and looked comfortable off of his back to a point where it's like, yeah, he is actually a legit black belt. He's given a black belt from Travis Lutter. So that's he's showing that not only can he smash dudes with his hands, he's a great grappler. And I've never seen anybody knock out a guy off his back like that. And that is pretty crazy.
After the fight and obviously knockout of the night honors, Kevin proceeded to go on and call out one of the most untouchable guys this year.
Yeah.
I'm going to fuck up his name, but 𝐓.𝐆.𝐻 𝐏, undefeated fighter. No one wants to fight this guy. Kevin wants to fight this guy, and I think it'd be an amazing fight.
We had the world's strongest Hutterite. Now we got the world's toughest Hutterite. He'll probably kill me for saying that. Anyways, yeah, that would be an amazing fight. These guys are just coming off these crazy starts and, winning streaks. Why not put them together? The world's strongest Hutterite was saying he'll come up to 185. So let's go. And, the other fight that, got the fucking most recognition was too much for us to handle. We have to pass that on to Hang 'em Up. Here we go.
For fuck's sake, your time has come. Hang 'em up. Please retire.
So on this week on Hang 'em Up, we're talking about none other than Tony Ferguson. I know that seems absolutely ridiculous considering a year ago, this man was considered by some to be the best in his division. He just didn't have the belt to prove it. This is a guy who never actually lost his title. He he was stripped of it due to an injury, even though the actual champ never had to beat him or never did beat him in his title reign. And coming off a big loss to Justin Gaethje, everyone thought he would bounce back in spectacular fashion, and that just really wasn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, you don't take that kind of beat down from Justin Gaethje for 5 rounds and come back normal. I mean, to begin with, he was fucked up and punch drunk. What did you say, Darrell?
He makes Nick Diaz sound like a Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah, Nick and Nate Diaz sound like fucking philosophers compared to him. He's absolute batshit crazy. I mean, a few years back, he got in trouble for some sort of domestic dispute. He's losing his marbles. I know it's hard for you to hang him up, but please, for the love of God, we don't want to see that again. I mean, that was an absolute beatdown, full domination. And that's not to take anything away from Oliveira, who probably came off the performance of his life. And I would say that, he would even probably give game Khabib a run for his money looking at that performance.
Strength Sports. Choices and consequences. Misfit. Special guest, strength coach, mad scientist meathead, Paul Oneid.
All right, everybody. We just got off an amazing call with Paul Oneid, one of Canada's leading strength coaches. He's got more degrees than veins in his arms. He's a fucking animal. Darrell?
I was really excited to talk to Paul. Learned a lot from him in the short time that I have known him. And I learned a bunch just from listening to him talk for this little interview we had. It was really beneficial for me.
Yeah, we got to pick the brain of a genius, and he definitely took us down a road where we could learn new facts and expose some of the kind of mysteries in the sport of powerlifting, essentially. So stay tuned and listen. All right, everybody, we're here with Paul Oneid, an awesome strength coach, one of the top guys in Canada. We're really happy to have him on the podcast. How you doing, Paul?
Doing great, guys. Thanks you very much for having me on. I've seen a bunch of your episodes, so I know it's going to be a fun one.
It will be for sure. Darrell?
Well, I'm excited to have you on because I knew about you as a strength coach just through friends that had hired you and seen the progress they're getting. And a little Google search, found out you're also one of the best powerlifters in the country. So it's always good to be top at both. So I'm excited to get into it today.
A little far removed from the latter, but yeah, hoping to get back into the upper echelon of Canadian lifters here. I'm competing again in 10 weeks for the first time in about a year. First time back in wraps in like 2 years, I think. So should be fun.
Yeah, man, I met you at the Strength's Edge a while back, maybe a couple months, and I didn't really know who you were, and we're just sitting there, and I'm just telling dick jokes, and you chime in, and it's pretty funny.
Oh, yeah.
This guy knows the drill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then I saw the next day, I wasn't at the gym, and I just saw what you were squatting. I was like, holy shit, this guy's legit. So definitely nice to meet you and then have you as a contact for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So we want to get into it, and I just kind of wanted to touch on more of the strength coach stuff in the beginning and wanted to see if you had a preferred programming for athletes in different sports, like a football player or powerlifter or strongman.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Like you can't treat everyone the same, and that goes for athletes within a given sport or athletes across multiple sports. So my background and experience primarily would be collegiate athletics. Like I spent 5 years in the US and a year here in Canada working at a number of different universities with various sports programs. And you have to look at the demands placed upon the athlete in order to know how to train them. So take a football player, for example. The demands on a wide receiver are going to be different than the demands on a lineman. And the demands on a lineman who plays for Nebraska are going to be different than the demands of a lineman who plays for Oregon. You've got one team that plays 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and then you've got one team who will have maybe twice as many offensive possessions as they do defensive possessions, simply because of how fast they play. So once you have I call it like a needs assessment. So you look at the athlete, you look at the needs of their given sport, and then you look at where their deficiencies lie. So if you were to plot that on a graph, you could look at it as, okay, where are they in terms of aerobic conditioning, anaerobic conditioning, lactate tolerance, speed, strength, speed, strength, power, absolute strength. And you kind of plot that in a graph. And then you look at, okay, I tend to like to program in a concurrent style. So concurrent periodization dictates that you're trying to bring up multiple sport qualities at the same time. So you'll have, within a given microcycle or a given week, you'll be working on all of those sport qualities. Where you place the emphasis of the training will be determined by the needs assessment of the athlete and the needs assessment of their sport, and factored into their lifestyle, their nutrition habits. Are you coaching them one-on-one, or are you coaching them as part of a team setting? This all plays into it. But essentially, to like short story long, if you approach it with a conjugate or concurrent periodization model, it really gives you a lot of flexibility, because in the collegiate setting, you're having to deal with class schedules, you're having to deal with tests, stressors, inconsistent sleep, a team atmosphere. It's a lot easier to plan if you know that, okay, on any given week, I'm going to hit everything, so that if my linear periodization model that I would have been using otherwise gets interrupted, I don't lose all those adaptations that I just trained for. Right? So that was my preferred method. And I came up with more concurrent style coaches. Like the coach I worked under at the University of South Florida, Frank Wintrick, who's now the head football strength coach at UCLA, he was conjugate. He now coaches more so like a block style periodization. Then I worked with Todd Hammer at Robert Morris University. He was conjugate guy. He wrote for Elite FTS. His wife edited Louis Simmons' book. So he was a conjugate guy. And then when I went back to Tampa, I kind of got to run my own show. So I got to choose what I applied and what I didn't apply. And I just felt that conjugate was the most flexible type of program. And I do with my powerlifters, like I know this is primarily a powerlifting podcast. So with my powerlifters, I never say that I run a conjugate program, because it immediately engenders this idea of, oh, this guy's a West Side guy. But if like conjugate and West Side are not one and the same. West Side is West Side. Conjugate just means you're training multiple adaptations at the same time. So within a given week, my guys, some will be using linear progressions on some movements. Some will be doing undulating on others. Some will be doing, dynamic effort on some, max effort on others. We'll mix up rep ranges. As long as there's some type of progression forward from week to week, and we're addressing weak points, we're going to get the job done. Right?
That's interesting. Yeah. And I like the way you put it. It's not West Side. That's all automatic. Everybody just thinks, but chains, bands,
yeah, exactly.
Dirty gym with dumbbells everywhere going crazy. Just a bunch of, West Side stuff going on. Just in your practices and your experiences, is there any type of kind of programming that's in powerlifting right now that you found doesn't really work that well, or hasn't had that much success with your athletes?
I think like a traditional West Side split is the one that is going to get the most attention on a question like that, because like West Side as it's programmed based on Louis' book doesn't address the needs of a raw lifter very well. So the West Side program itself, dictates that around 20% of your total volume is done on the main lift and 80% is done on special exercises or assistance work. As a raw lifter, you need to spend more time building tolerance within the positions of your competition movement. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to be doing squat, bench, and deadlift exclusively. That just means that those patterns should be mimicked very closely on most of your movements. And I also think that that system is quite complex if you're going to program it properly, and most people don't have the requisite knowledge to do so, right? So as soon as you get into manipulating variables, there's too many moving parts in a program like a West Side program, and most people don't know how to manage them. What I like to do is, again, we do our needs assessment. We look at where the person needs work. We also look at where are they coming from, where is their starting point. Like if I get a lifter who starts with a dynamic undulating periodization program, someone who's squatting 4 times a week, benching 4 times a week, deadlifting 2-3 times a week, I'm not going to automatically drop them down to 2 squats, 1 deadlift, and 2 benches, because they'll end up being undertrained. Yeah. So you have to look at, where is this athlete now? Where do I want them to be? And how do we get them from A to B in a way that is going to allow us to continue to progress while we regress at the same time? So yeah, I rambled on a little bit. I've had a lot of caffeine, but essentially what I'm trying to say is the programs or the periodization models that get butchered the most are the ones where people try to get a little too complex. We try to do a little bit too much, and there's too many variables involved. And when that happens, it's like if someone makes you chili and then you think you're allergic to the chili, but the chili has 500 ingredients and you don't know which one you're allergic to.
Yeah.
Right. So you end up having to go to this elimination diet and, pick and choose what you eat at one time. I think the simpler, the better, especially at the beginning. And as you master the basics, then you can add complexity to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you brought up, people just need to keep it a lot more simple, probably, because especially here in town, there's a lot of people guilty of trying to wear too many hats and do things that are out of their skill. Like if you're not good at something, I find for myself, I'll just tell someone like I'm not that experienced in that, instead of lying to someone and trying to program something I don't understand fully. I'm not going to just give you something because I'm going to be wasting your time.
But that to me, that's a sign of maturity, and that's a sign of competence. When I speak to a young, so I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had to work with young coaches. And there's 2 things that I look for in a conversation with a young coach is, can they tell me that they don't know something? Like, do they have the confidence to say, no, Paul, I don't know that, but I'll do my best to find out. Or, you know what? I don't know that, but someone else might.
Yeah.
It tells me that you have a maturity that you're open to learn. The next one is that they're open to do, the next one has nothing to do with your question. It's if they're open to doing something for free. So like working for free and volunteering. But yeah, I think if you have the ability to say, I don't know, but I know somebody who does, or, I might not know this, but Russ is a better expert than me, so go ask him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Just wanted to see what your take was on training athletes that, me and you talked about this before, slow and fast athletes.
Yeah.
And what are the differences in programming for them? If they're in the same sport, same position, let's say everything is the same, but one lifts fast, one lifts slow.
So, I mean, for simplicity's sake, let's stick with powerlifting. You have one guy who's just grinding all his lifts, but he's still getting stronger. You have one guy, yeah, Darrell. Everything above 500 looks the same, but you pull over 8. You have to look at, okay, why is this person slow? So speed of a barbell movement depends on leverages, inertia, and the rate of force development. So all that to say is, how fast can I develop force to break this object from a dead stop and then move it through a point of poor leverage. So we'll just take the deadlift, for example. A sumo deadlifter off the floor will have poor leverage, but their leverages improve as the lift gets higher. So usually a sumo deadlifter will miss off the floor unless they give up their lower back, quad it off the floor, and then miss their knee. But a conventional deadlifter will usually blow the bar off the floor and then miss closer to lockout. It's a leverage issue. If you're a slow lifter, you have to maintain your leverage to finish a lift. Whereas if you're a fast lifter, you can blow through that point of bad leverage because you carried more speed off the floor. Right? So you have to look at, is this person slow because their leverages are poor, or are they slow because they have a bad rate of force development? So it takes someone like Mitch Chesney, who you both know, trains at Strength Edge. So Mitch has a really fast deadlift off the floor, and he tends to lose it around lockout because he gives up his back positioning off the floor to make it move faster. If I can actually get Mitch to move slower and hold his position, he might move the bar slower, but because he maintained the position, he'll complete the lift. So oftentimes, the rate of force development isn't caused by an actual inability to produce force. It's positional. So once you make that distinction, you can look at, does this person actually need speed work? Or do I just need to get them stronger within these positions that tend to break down? The next is, if it is a rate of force development issue, a slower lifter will have to be more stable than a fast lifter because they have to hold those positions for a longer period of time. A fast lifter will tend to be more unstable. So their assistance work should be focused on slowing them down and putting them in those positions that force them to be stable. So you look at, we'll keep with the trend of the deadlift. So someone, a really fast deadlifter that loses it at lockout, have them do some tempo Romanian deadlifts. So holding that back position and forcing them to be nice and slow through those positions where they're very poor. If they are a slower lifter, you might put them in a position with lighter loads, with maybe maybe not accommodating resistance right away, but with a load that they have to put effort to, but they can still move quickly, and then get them to be faster at applying force into the ground. Typically, speed work works better for sumo deadlifters than it does conventional deadlifters because inertia is so much higher and the leverages are so much poorer on the sumo deadlift off the floor. Rate of force development matters more because it doesn't matter how much force you can produce. If it's produced so slow that you can't hold your position long enough for it to pull the bar off the floor, you'll lose it. So with sumo, I tend to train a lot of conventional with sumo deadlifters to get their backs really strong. So that even if they are a little bit slower at breaking the floor, their back is so strong that they hold their position. Because what you'll see with a sumo deadlifter is they'll start pulling into the bar and the bar won't actually move. But then all of a sudden, after about 1 or 2 seconds, their spine will flex and then they'll get the bar off the floor. All that spinal flexion did was bring their hips closer. But it lost their back position and they won't be able to lock out. So if you can get their back stronger so it's more rigid and they can take a little bit more time to break that bar off the floor, then you're going to be in a good position. So the slow versus fast, I don't think you necessarily need to implement any fancy training styles. You need to address why they're slow or why they're fast and determine if it's a positional issue or if it is actually a speed issue.
All right, perfect.
Cool. All right, let's get into some juicy tidbits here. We want to know. So the difference between, normal and enhanced athletes and how you would program for them differently. Let's just train a few of those, or you don't.
Yeah. So this is something that I've been actually thinking about more and more because In that like mid-range, you can make the argument that, all athletes should be trained the same. The only difference in response is their stress response. But when you add anabolics into the equation, it does change the stress response. So one thing you'll see when you add anabolics is you'll have a better recovery from an individual training session. So that means that you'll be able to tolerate more volume within a given session. But the work you've done within that session will tend to be heavier. So the amount of fatigue accumulated is actually higher than a natural lifter. So while the recovery is improved, the amount of damage you've done is higher. So it doesn't necessarily decrease the recovery time between sessions, but it does allow you to dig that hole deeper and climb back out of it, right? So we look at the stimulus response adaptation curve, so the SRA curve. It is, I stimulate the muscle, I have a detraining effect, I recover above normal, and then I adapt and I stay above that normal. That's when I hit it again. So that's how we have that cyclical pattern of training. Now, anabolics also allow you to decay fitness slower, which means that I can hold an adaptation with an enhanced athlete longer. So I can take them further away from the competition lift and the competition specificity longer than I can a natural lifter, which means, say I have a natural lifter who I want to do some volume accumulation work. During that volume phase, their maximal output of strength will decrease quite significantly. Like their top end strength will decrease quite a bit because neurologically, they don't maintain that level of fitness. Whereas with an enhanced athlete, I can take them away from that specificity and their maximal strength won't drop as much. What that means from a programming standpoint is I will have to go heavier and more specific with a natural lifter more often.
Nice.
But with an enhanced lifter, I can keep them away from that heavy work. That benefits the enhanced lifter because that heavy work demands recovery. And if we're in a volume block or strength building block, I don't want to be, quote unquote, wasting adaptive resources on these heavy singles, but I need to keep them there so that the athlete doesn't detrain. So it's a multifaceted equation here. It's, yes, I can recover better, but I also can do more damage within a session. So the recovery between sessions is a wash. Where it becomes important is I have to go heavier with a natural athlete, which makes it harder to recover for them, and they already have a decreased recovery capacity. Plus, when it comes to peaking, I have to lift them heavier closer to the meet because they decrease, their fitnesses decay faster. So whereas an enhanced lifter might be able to take their heaviest squat 3 weeks out, that natural lifter might only be able to make it 2 weeks because if I go 3 weeks without squatting heavy, they'll detrain and actually come in weaker. So that's why you see the training lifts for natural athletes are much closer to their competition lifts than enhanced lifters. Like I have a lifter who he squatted 830 and the heaviest we went in training is 760.
Wow.
But we hit a 760 double and then his 830 moved like air. Because we took it 3 weeks out. Then we hit like some 700 singles, then he deloaded, then he had his meet. That we stimulated and then we responded really favorably and we kept that level of fitness really high. Whereas for a natural lifter, if I have them do their heavier work, 2 weeks out, maybe we're looking for 5-10 kilos at the meet, but it's going to be much closer than that enhanced lifter. The super compensation you get from a peak is much, much bigger.
Awesome.
There's trade-offs for everything. So what a big thing with me is like, I'm a big believer that there's no right and wrong in anything that we do. There's just trade-offs.
Yeah.
Right. So you can choose one thing or choose another. And as long as you can validate why you chose that thing, have at her. The only justification for your means is the results. I could have you standing on one foot, curling a kettlebell with your cock. If you have a bigger total, that means it worked.
Yeah.
right? Like, but are you going to be able to replicate that? Maybe not. But there's a trade-off. Like that time you spent curling your kettlebell with your cock, maybe if you did something else, you would have got better results.
Yeah.
But if you got stronger, you got stronger, and we're heading in the right direction.
You might fill out your singlet a little better too. You know?
Well, my meat day dick is the fucking worst.
Battle cock.
Like digging around for it, like pinching with 2 fingers. Yeah.
Just straight baby dick and baby.
So to continue on with talking about it, like natural and enhanced lifters, you're also a nutrition coach, and just seeing if there's any difference when have someone for nutrition, when you have someone natural enhanced, is there a different demand?
Yeah, there's inherently a different demand, but there's also, again, some trade-offs. So when you introduce anabolics, you ultimately increase protein turnover and you increase metabolism. So someone who is enhanced will inherently burn more calories than someone who is not enhanced. So there's an increased demand for food. Whenever there's an increased demand for food, it means that you're turning over nutrients at a faster pace, which means you have a higher propensity to put on lean tissue, which is why, you know, if you look at a 220 enhanced lifter versus 100, like a 220 natural guy, the enhanced guy tends to carry much more muscle than the natural guy. Their strengths might be quite similar because strength is typically a neurological adaptation, but the enhanced lifter will typically carry more muscle. That also means that they can get away with a little bit more on a dietary perspective, so they can be a little bit looser with the diet and still make progress. But it doesn't give them carte blanche. Like it's not an end all be all thing where it's like, yeah, you're on gear, you can eat chips and salsa all day and you'll still get jacked. I don't know why I said chips and salsa. But anyway. What I find actually the most interesting about anabolics is its effect on metabolic adaptation. So metabolic adaptation is something that happens when we diet or we gain weight, where the body's metabolism essentially catches up to your intake. So as you diet, you will notice, if you've ever done a diet, you might decrease your calories X amount. You might lose weight initially, but eventually you stop losing weight with that caloric intake and you have to drop it down more. That's because of hormonal processes that happen within the body that essentially match the body's metabolism to its intake because it wants to maintain homeostasis. It wants to stay neutral. That happens because thyroid function decreases. You might lose a little bit of muscle mass. Testosterone does go down as you start diet more and more. And you'll have increased cortisol, a lot of things that would be quote unquote bad, but are just normal things that happen over the course of a diet, especially when it drags on. When you introduce anabolics to the system, you end up in this situation where you're not losing muscle. It takes very little testosterone to maintain muscle mass during a diet. Then you're in a position where testosterone is antagonistic to cortisol, which means that your cortisol will inherently be lower. It means you're not burning as much muscle. You're building muscle, in fact, in a lot of situations, if you've never done a cycle before and you introduce one for a diet. So the number of calories you'll need to drop and maintain the progress of weight loss tends to be less, which is really, really, really beneficial once you get to that higher level of leanness. And that's why you see guys take larger stacks when they're dieting. You're like, oh, it's kind of a waste because like you're not eating food, right? You're not eating fuel to use those drugs to build muscle. But what they're doing is they're actually trying to avoid metabolic adaptation. They're trying to make sure they can still eat a lot of calories while still losing body fat. And I will say that like anyone who says like, I want to lose weight is kind of lying, because nobody really wants to lose weight. They want you to lose body fat, right? I want to be leaner. I don't want to be smaller. Fuck that. Yeah. I want to be huge. So it's like finding a balance. When it comes to weight gain, I want to say the opposite tends to be true, but you do put yourself in a very precarious position when you start introducing, we'll call them processed foods. Okay, so when you get into a situation where you're eating lots of carbohydrates, lots of fats, testosterone also introduces a state of hyperinsulinemia, which means that naturally you'll be secreting more insulin, which is very anabolic and helpful when you want to put on tissue. But if you're in a situation where your carbohydrates are very high and your fats are very high, that's a recipe for metabolic syndrome. That's why you've got a bunch of guys who, are blasting gear and they end up type 2 diabetic because their carbohydrates and their fats are so high. They're relatively sedentary outside of their weight training and they're eating all this processed food. Well, boom, you're hyperinsulinemic. You end up with insulin resistance and you can't put on good tissue anymore. So I'm a big fan of, if you're going to introduce anabolics, you should do so in the healthiest way possible. And so something I preach to all of my clients is like, we're going to eat whole foods. We're going to eat single ingredient foods. We're going to make sure that the protein that we're eating is from lean sources. We're going to prioritize our nutrition around training. We're going to sleep. We're going to eat fruits. We're going to eat vegetables. We're going to make sure that we put ourselves in the healthiest position possible to benefit from these drugs, whether it be weight loss or weight gain. The other thing too is, as an enhanced lifter, there are a bunch of metabolic issues that run into, like, your HDL cholesterol, your good cholesterol will go down. Okay, that's a side effect of testosterone. That can be mitigated with cardiovascular activity and a healthy diet. So why the fuck wouldn't we do a little bit of cardiovascular activity and keep our diet as healthy as we can? As a natural athlete, you don't necessarily have to worry about these things as much. As long as you're eating in a caloric surplus with an adequate amount of protein and you're training hard, you're going to put on muscle. Where the dietary things come into play with anabolics is you want to make sure you do it right so you don't shorten your life.
Yeah, no shit. You touched on insulin and sensitivity, and
Yep.
one thing we've talked about kind of with a few guests is just, insulin is also being used as a performance enhancing drug. And since you seem to be the man with all the knowledge, let me know, or let us know, how can you use that to your advantage? Let's say if someone's doing just insulin injections.
If you were doing just insulin injections, yeah, you might get a benefit in terms of your recovery, bit muscle fullness, but there's a lot of risk when it comes to insulin. So, I mean, I'll be honest, I've used insulin before. I didn't like it. I found it made me really watery, really fat, because you will retain a ton of water when you take insulin, which is great if you're someone who maybe you're really lean and your joints get dry when you start lifting heavy, or you're looking to put on tissue as quickly as possible. But the side effect of insulin is possible death. You can go into an hyperinsulinemic shock. Your blood sugar will drop too quickly and you'll pass out. There's also hypoglycemia. And a lot of people take way too much. So what the best practices are now within the bodybuilding community is where you're going to get the most knowledge about insulin, right? Is you set the diet as it is, and then you provide a little bit of insulin to help with carbohydrate metabolism, especially before and after training. Now, where you're going to run into problems is over time, your body becomes very, very, very adept in handling insulin. So that 4 IUs that you might have taken initially will quickly become 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for the same amount of carbohydrates. That means that you're not processing the insulin properly and you're getting resistant to it. The only time I would ever say that it might, I'm caveating this, might be beneficial to use insulin is if you're eating so many carbohydrates that you want to kind of give your body some help. And like, I've never had a nutrition client who's gotten to that point, but I would venture a guess it would be around that 1,000 carbohydrate mark. It's like 1,000 grams of carbohydrates a day. And I have a couple of guys. I have a guy, he's a 242 lifter. He's eating about 850 grams of carbohydrates on his training days. but he's processing it just fine because I have him walking a lot. He's training hard, and his carbohydrates are spaced out appropriately throughout the day. I think if you are someone who is looking at insulin as a performance enhancing drug, you're either too big of a pussy to take testosterone, you are a drug-free lifter who's insecure about their ability to compete at that level, or you are grossly misinformed about the benefits of that drug.
Yeah.
There is way too much risk associated with taking insulin for me to ever advise anyone to do it.
Okay, cool.
It's awesome to hear your perspective on it, because like we don't know about this stuff at all. So to hear from someone who knows what they're talking about is great for us.
Well, and I'm by no means an expert on any of this, but I have done my research enough to know, like Darrell, as we've talked about before, it's like, I don't think the risk reward matches up. If you want a coach to coach you on insulin use, I am confident enough to say, probably not going to be the guy to do that for you. Here's someone who might, and I could refer them out to somebody like that.
Makes sense.
So just kind of on the same subject, for performance wise, on the days that you're lifting, like you just mentioned that you jack up, your athlete's carbs to 800.
Yeah. So,
how is that important? And obviously, someone doing a keto diet should not be powerlifting whatsoever.
Well, I mean, the keto people make an argument for, we're only doing one to three repetitions, so we're not really burning any glycogen. The argument there is that all recovery is aerobic, so you're always recovering and always replenishing glycogen. I think for the most part, carbohydrates get overused, and people just think they need more than they do. Like, especially if you're training like a typical powerlifter, like, I mean, you guys have seen the guys I coach. Like, I do a lot of volume with those guys. They need their carbohydrates. But if you're doing like 3 sets of 3 on the squat, and then 4 sets of 5 on the bench press, and then some RDLs, and you're going home, you probably don't need many carbs. Okay. What I like to use for the majority of my lifters who are competing at a higher level, if they're able to manage it, I like to use a carb cycling approach. So carb cycling essentially necessitates that on training days, you eat very low fats and very high carbohydrates, and then you reverse that on your rest days, but the calories remain kind of similar. What I like to do is I like to flip that a little bit, and I like to put my athletes in a surplus on their training days and in a slight deficit on their rest days. And some people will say, oh yeah, but on your rest days is when you're recovering. Yeah, but unfortunately for your argument, the clock of the body doesn't reset every 24 hours and forget about what just happened. It's not like the clock strikes midnight, boom, oh my God, I'm in a deficit today, I'm going to lose my muscle. Everything carries through. And if you look at the science, the effects of a training session in terms of insulin sensitivity and energy output can last 24 to 48 hours. So if you're training on a consistent basis 4 or 5 days a week, you're recovering all the time, right? All we're trying to do with that carbohydrate intake on training days is make sure that you are topped up to the brim in terms of glycogen. You can maintain your blood sugar the whole workout, and that you have everything you need for building blocks to get stronger. Then on the rest days, when your energy expenditure is lower, you're not necessarily using all the carbohydrates, you just drop them back down. What that also does is it serves to maximize insulin sensitivity. Because if I'm going from high carbohydrate to low carbohydrate, I have periods of high insulin and I have periods of low insulin. We kind of start developing some metabolic flexibility in the process. It also allows us to eat more total carbohydrates during the week. So what I like to do is I'll have if I know an athlete's training 4 days, they'll have their training day nutrition and their rest day nutrition. Protein will stay the same on both days, only carbs and fats will flip-flop. And then I'll have the daily average calories at the top. And all that is a function of if they're dieting, I make sure those that average daily calories kind of starts to go down a little bit as they metabolically adapt to the diet. But we prioritize the training session because the bulk of my athletes are powerlifters. So when you're dealing with a powerlifter, the most important part of their day is the training. The training is what we need to protect, right? So even if they're dieting, I need to make sure they're fueled for training, because the training is where they're going to adapt. That's their sport, right? So carb cycling allows me, even though they're in a deficit for the whole week, they could still maintain a surplus for that day they're training.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it kind of, and the average caloric intake for the week, as long as that keeps going down, we should be losing body fat. Right. The hard part with that and diet in general for people is adherence. So a carb cycling diet necessitates a lot more planning on the part of the athlete. So for someone with a really busy schedule, or children, or they work in an office, or whatever the insert, lifestyle circumstance, it just might not be a feasible option for them. So what I'll do is I will take that daily average calories, I will reduce it slightly, and then on training days, I'll introduce a workout shake. So I'll give them carbohydrates during training sessions. That doesn't count towards their daily macros. So on every day, they eat the same macros, but on the training days, they add in this shake. And that shake will be some carbohydrates, some essential aminos, some creatine, to make sure that they are getting some form of intra-workout nutrition to maintain their blood sugar, power output, recovery. So they do maximize that workout window to some extent.
Do you ever involve intermittent fasting or any type of fasting, time restricted eating?
So the only times I've ever found that to be somewhat successful is adherence at the end of a diet. So like, say you have 5 meals a day and I'll give you an example. So I dieted about 3 years ago before I got married. And the end of my diet, I was doing like 2 hours of cardio a day and eating 1,600 calories. It was awful. I was shredded. I would purposefully not eat until noon and be starving, because I knew that it would make the day a little bit easier if I crammed those 1,600 calories into that 6-8 hour window. Had nothing to do with performance, nothing to do with fat loss. It was just adherence. I knew that if I only had that amount of time to eat, it would just make it a little bit easier. The big thing for me is I want to be frequently feeding my athletes with protein throughout the day. The longer time you spend not eating protein, you think about protein as a flux. Okay, so your body is always anabolic and catabolic. It's never just you're building muscle and then breaking it down. There's always a flux of breakdown and rebuild, breakdown and rebuild, breakdown and rebuild. So if you're not giving your body amino acids, the rate of breakdown will exceed the rate of building. Okay. As soon as you introduce amino acids, you start building more than you're breaking down. It's always in flux. So if you want to be building muscle long term, you need to make sure that the rate of flux is always positive in terms of building versus breakdown. Increasing the number of protein feedings, 3 to 5 seems to be the most appropriate amount. Then you're going to be doing well in terms of maintaining that flux. So if your goal is performance, willfully restricting nutrients for periods of the day just simply doesn't make sense within the paradigm of recovery, right? Because if you're not fueled, you're always in flux, right? You're always burning fuel. So in times when you're restricting the fuel that you're inputting into the system, you're burning the system's fuel. We want to protect that fuel, let that fuel do its work in terms of recovery, and always keep feeding the machine. That all being said, if you find it more helpful to just not eat until 11 a.m. and it works within your lifestyle, you're not going to be doing yourself a disservice by doing that.
Yeah.
Right? It's about, to me, it's like, here's the best case scenario. Okay. Here's where you're comfortable. If I can get you a little closer to that best case scenario, then I'm doing a great job as a coach, as long as you can follow it. Because the only program that's going to work is when you can follow. I'm not trying to fit your square peg into a round hole. What, if anything, I'm trying to, shave that round hole, make it bigger so your square fits. As a coach, that's my job. Put a plan together that you can follow. I'm not trying to force you to follow my plan.
As a nutrition and strength coach, just kind of want to know what's harder for you, fixing someone's poor diet or fixing a lifter's poor technical form, like if they've been doing it for, let's say, someone who's already developed bad habits and been doing it for a couple of years.
Diet, 100% diet. You want a gateway into someone's psychology? Fix their diet. I'm telling you, the amount of emotional attachment people have to the things they put in their mouth, is hilarious. It's unbelievable. I have had clients who've confessed past traumas in their lives, like so many different things that are tied to their inability to manage stress, and they use food as a comfort to do so. Being hungry is one of people's biggest fears, right? So when you ask someone to be hungry willfully for a period of time, a lot of crazy stuff happens in their head. Fixing someone's bad form, man, it's really a matter of getting them to check their ego and reminding them that they hired you for a reason, right? I'm also not like, I used to be very, very steadfast in my approach that we're going to back everything off until you can move this perfectly before we progress it forward. But over time, my approach has been, all right, I'm going to choose movements that force you to move the way I want you to move. And then we're going to just keep moving you that way as we progress load. So because of the system that I've adopted, I haven't had to be as rigid with my athletes in fixing their technique because the program kind of fixes it for me. Obviously, I give coaching cues and review videos like on a daily basis from my athletes, but the diet, fixing a relationship with food, it's been eye-opening for me. I used to really think like, hey man, you're hiring me to do your diet. Here's your diet, follow that. And then I get people that, can't hit their macros. Like, I did my best. I'd be like, you didn't fucking do your best. You didn't do anything. But, soften your approach over time. And you look, this is actually this person's best. They don't have the tools required to adhere to what you're doing. How do you either provide them those tools or regress the system in a fashion that they can adhere to it and then progress them forward? If you're a diet coach and you're coaching people on their nutrition, it has way more to do with psychology and communication than it does with science.
How hard has it been for you to keep clients accountable during lockdowns, whether it's where you're at or I know you got lots of people in Alberta?
I find it much harder with the home workouts than with the nutrition because the nutrition is something that's 100% within their control for the most part, especially if they're home all day now, right? So if they're not working, they're home, everything they put in their mouth is within their control. And when we are stressed, when we are feeling anxiety, we reach for controls. So I frame the nutrition as something that is completely within their control. And so when they start seeing results through the nutrition plan, they have buy-in, and then it stops becoming something I need to hold them accountable, and it becomes something they want to hold themselves accountable to because they know they're pushing towards their goals and they're seeing the results. Getting someone to do booty band workouts, or I don't program those, but like, workouts with like a 40-pound kettlebell in their living room when they're used to squatting 500-600 pounds. That's a little bit harder, man. You really get into the situation. It's like, what the fuck is the point of this? Fuck this. I'd rather do nothing. Unfortunately, that's where people are at right now. So you do your best to educate them on, we can do a lot of progress with this. We can slow our tempos down, get our joints moving better, get healthier, get, get our bodies feeling good so we can jump back under the bar and move well. Some people just don't have it in them. If it's not a barbell, they say, fuck it. And that's honestly, that used to bother me. But at this point, it's not my fight. I can educate, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't force him to drink.
I mean, I think if you're a real motherfucking gangster, like you and Darrell and I, the moment we found out there's gonna be a lockdown, the first thing we did was put together a home gym that you can lift 500 to 600 pounds with, right? I mean, not everybody has that option, I guess, in bigger cities, like living in apartments or whatever. But that was the first thing that hit my brain when the gym closed and laid me off. It was like next day, bells of steel, order everything I can. You know, it was kind of just.
Well, you talk about apartments, like Mitch, who I mentioned earlier, he's got a squat stand, a bench, a barbell, and 600 pounds of plates in his condo.
Yeah.
But he's still fucking clanging and banging. We can't touch the ground on his deadlifts, but I mean, we can do a lot of work with that. So it really depends on, like, if you're in a situation where I hesitate to say this because I don't want to tell people to like go outside the guidelines of the, we'll call it law in quotes.
Yeah.
But we all know somebody who has equipment. Like during the first lockdown here, so I left Alberta when it was still open, but when I got to Ontario, it was closing down. And so originally I was training at my business partner's gym, and then he closed his gym. So I was training at 5 a.m. so no one would be there. Yeah, fucking deadlifting at 5 a.m. because I had to do it and I wanted to get my training in. And then when he was, when everything was for real lockdown, we put some of the equipment in one of my clients' garages. And we were training in his garage. And I trained in his garage all summer long until I got the equipment that I had ordered. And then I set up my home gym. So you make it work. There are options available. And, you get a group of people together. It's like, oh, well, so-and-so lives in Airdrie. I don't want to drive all the way to Airdrie. Well, then fuck, you're lazy. When there's a will, there's a way. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that if there is a will, you will find a way. And if that means that you are stuck with your 40-pound kettlebell in your living room, well, then you pay me the money to let me write your program. Let me write you a program that you're going to follow. And I guarantee I can kick your ass with a 40-pound kettlebell.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. It just brings up something we've been talking about a lot. Just a lot of, especially this year, a lot of people bitching about their circumstances, but a lot of it is they can control it themselves. And like you said, almost everybody knows someone with equipment. I understand now in Alberta, they're given fines for going to people's place. So I can understand that people being hesitant then, but during the first one, like there was literally no excuse not to try and do everything you can. Cause like you said, people bitch about driving. Oh, I don't want to drive 20, 30 minutes. What else are we going to do? We can't do shit else. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to a movie. If you really care about this, you can make the time. Like I had a buddy who hit me up because he knew I had a full garage gym. He would drive in from Chestermere 4 days a week, no problem. If I told him, okay, you can come in now, he'd be like, all right, be there. I'm heading there right now. You got guys like that who will do it, but then other people who can't use their cushy gym and, oh, no, I won't do this.
And your gym's probably fucking freezing right now because it's minus 20 outside and you're still clanging away, doing whatever you got to do.
Yeah, you make it. If something's important in your life, you're going to make time for it regardless what it is. So like obviously you see that the most with having nutrition people too, but it's like when people say they want to look better and lose weight, it's like, well, do you? Because if you're not making any steps towards it, I can't really believe what you're saying. Because if you're telling me for 3 years that you're trying to get leaner and look better, but you haven't taken anything serious, haven't hired a coach, haven't even tried stepping in the gym. No, you just want that gratification of someone saying, oh, that's awesome, man. It's like, no, fucking do the work.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation. A buddy of mine came over and just chatted with me while I was training. And we're talking about like client intakes. So when I intake a client for nutrition, I ask them to submit a 3-day food log from MyFitnessPal, just like send me screenshots. So I always think it's funny when I have like a super fat client and they send me this like pristine food log.
Carrots.
All my protein every day. All my carbohydrates only from complex carbohydrates. And then I'm like, bro, you're fat as fuck.
Yeah.
This isn't how you eat. Like, how many pizzas did you not put in this thing?
Yeah.
And so all this vibe, like, hey, you know what? From your intake form, it looks like you're quite adept at tracking your food. What I'm going to look for is some more consistency. And I kind of like backhandedly tell them that they're cheating. It's like, I would rather you eat 100 more calories per day than 700 more calories on one day. And I talk to them about like, you know, because the reality is in nutrition, say you're eating 2,000 calories a day, but then on one day you eat 4,000. If you average that over the rest of the week, you might as well have eaten those additional calories each day. You would actually be in a better position than just slamming those 4,000 calories in one day. And so I kind of like backhandedly call them liars, and it's always well received. Well, yeah, I mean, but I cheat once a week. And, you know, when I cheat, it's nachos and ice cream and pizza. And I'm like, oh my God.
What about, I mean, Darrell, he's straight edge, doesn't drink, doesn't do anything fun but lift weights. But I like to get crunk every now and then and drink a fucking bottle of vodka and, and maybe every other night. But how is that? Like, I think a lot of your clients probably lie about that aspect too. Like, you know,
well, so I use a bit of a flexible dieting approach. So it's I provide a food, like we'll call it an approved foods list.
Yeah.
Which primarily just cuts out a lot of processed foods, prioritizes lean meats, you know, lets them know, like, I like to use more of a lower FODMAP diet because it's a bit easier to digest. I stay away from a lot of dairy just because, again, for digestion purposes. But I also give people the freedom to say, hey, if you like milk and you drink it and it makes you feel good, then go ahead and do it. I also let them know that so have you heard of the 80-20 rule?
Yeah. So
most people interpret that as saying like, oh, 80% of the time I eat on plan and 20% of the time I eat fun foods. That's assuming if you're 100% within the guidelines of your plan, which means 80% of your diet should be whole, like single ingredient whole foods. 20% can be processed fun foods, as long as 100% of the time you're hitting your macros. So that's what I tell people. I'm like, if you want to go out and have, say you're going out and you know you want to have 6 beers, I would say, okay, first thing in the morning, put those 6 beers in your tracking app, and then the rest of your day, eat on a budget so that you have those 6 beers already tracked. You eat all your food, you go out with your friends, you have your 6 beers, no stress. You hit your goals, you hit your calories, you hit your protein, you hit your carbs, you hit your fats, boom, you had a great day. And you still got to have your 6 beers. It's like something I'll do is like with myself, especially when I'm like training for a meet or I have a fat loss goal that I'm going after, is like, I like going and having sushi with my friends, whether it be with my girlfriend or with my brother. I will, first thing in the morning, I will put the sushi in the app, and then I will just hold myself to eat that amount of sushi when I go out in the evening. But I eat my normal meals during the day, save a few of the calories that I'm going to spend in the evening. So I accomplish the goal. That's one strategy. The other one is like, if you go a month hitting your macros every single day, and then you have one day where you go and drink to excess, assuming you don't like drink to excess, eat a whole cake, like do a whole bunch, like eat 30,000 calories in a day. If your diet is so hyper dependent on you being perfect, you will not succeed. I tell my clients right from the beginning, there is no such thing as perfect. Our goal is to be as close to our best as we can and to make the best decisions we can. So if someone says to me, Paul, I went over by 50 carbs, but I allocated 100 for this meal. it was really good and I really wanted to have a piece of cake that my grandmother made, but I didn't budget for it. I ate it anyway. I enjoyed it, and I'm back on plan tomorrow. And guess what? That's a really healthy relationship with food. The problems I have with people, quote unquote, cheating on their diet is when they say, "Oh, I ate like 7 cookies and then I felt so shitty about myself. So the next day I restricted my calories like crazy and did extra cardio." It's like, no, man, like it's okay. You made a choice to say that eating those cookies was more important than your goal for that day. That's not good. That's not bad. It's a choice you made. You punishing yourself the next day and you stressing and feeling guilty about it is going to do way more damage than the calories in those 7 cookies. We forget that, like, as soon as we put gas in the gas tank, the engine runs hotter. So you ever had a cheat meal and you start sweating? Because your metabolism is picking up to match the intake that you just did. So even if you overate by 5,000 calories, you're not actually going to digest those 5,000 calories. Who fucking cares? It's one day out of the how many ever weeks between that day and the other days that you've been hitting your macros perfectly. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the group of friends that you were with and you partook in this social gathering and, it put a smile on your face. You had a great night's sleep and then you just hop back on the diet tomorrow. No big deal. That's a healthy relationship with food.
Cool, man. Well, we're coming close to the end here. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking over an hour and it's been amazing. It's gone quickly.
Yeah.
Just to ask you, in terms of nutrition and lockdown, how has that affected your clients in terms of, have you noticed them, gaining a shit ton of weight? Because everybody I talk to has got the COVID-19 plus 19 pounds.
No, I mean, for the most part, I've had a lot of really good successes with nutrition over the course of the pandemic. I've been working with my friend's mother, actually. She's lost 45 pounds since the first lockdown. She hasn't weighed what she weighed since she got married. My mom's lost 20 pounds just working with me. And my mom doesn't track anything. She just eats mindfully and has a few guidelines that she adheres to. And I think developing a system in which food facilitates your lifestyle versus becomes a stressor is the key. And knowing that for people during a time of a lot of unknowns, that they can control their nutrition and stay on top of it and know that it's making them feel better, they cling to it a little bit closer. It's when people feel like things are outside their control and their food becomes a stressor and they have all these cravings because they're not sleeping well at night because they're so stressed and blah, blah, blah. That's when you get the weight gain, the compounding effects of it. And you also develop a really unhealthy relationship with food and associated with a ton of negative things.
Well, Darrell, I think our fat fucking asses need a fucking nutritional coach because he put on 30 and I probably put on roughly the same, give or take. But we've been hitting weights pretty hard.
Well, yeah, as long as you're putting those 30 pounds to use on your total.
Oh yeah, it's definitely helped all the lifts. And honestly, I didn't notice a difference in my eating. If anything, I thought I was eating better because before the first lockdown, we were going out every weekend, twice a weekend, having at Ricky's what we called the Gary. We named it after our teammate. It was a normal Grand Forks breakfast, but we added everything that he would eat in it. So it's 6 eggs, it's 4 pancakes, it's 6 bacon, and it's stuffed hash browns.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
5,000 the minimum.
Dude, it was like, I'm a pretty big eater, but I was still probably I was always the slowest person to eat it. There'd be me, Russ, Buddy Spence, James, Gary, everybody orders it. We're like, we want 5 Garys, just fire them up.
That's amazing.
And that was once or twice a week.
Oh,
I haven't had a greasy spoon breakfast in a long time.
Oh, fuck.
That was probably the thing I missed the most. It wasn't the food so much, but it was just being around everyone and just like being able to hang out with people. And then I thought I was eating fine and I never even thought to step on a scale. And after about the 4 months of the first lockdown, got on the scale for the first time at Strength Edge I went into the lockdown around 250, 255. I was 265. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I've been eating a little big. 2 months later, Evan and a couple of guys hopped on the scale and said, get on it, let's see. I was 285 that day. I was like, I need to reassess my life. Yeah, I'm getting strong, but I don't know if I like 285.
Squat and bench are getting respectable finally. So
I ended up, I competed in February and then I started losing weight, like just purposefully.
Yeah.
Ended up losing like 25 pounds. And then I'm up about 10 from that now.
nice.
So sitting around 225. I'll compete in February at 220. But I got pretty fucking shredded. So sweet. It was my way of, so you want to talk about control. Like I used food as a kind of a thing that is within my control. And the whole reason I moved back to Ontario was because I got a divorce. So I was like, well, if I'm going to get divorced, I might as well look fucking good. Yeah.
I was actually gonna ask you about that, about with you competing and everything and what your weight class is. How heavy do you like to sit outside of your weight class? Or do you diet over like 12 weeks going up to it so that you feel okay dropping weight, or do you like to stay near it?
So what I'll do typically, so this is my first time I'll weight cut in 2 years, probably in the last 3 or 4 meets. So I was competing at 242, but I would weigh like 233. I just didn't want to cut. When I was competing at my best around 2015, 2016, when I competed at 220, I would walk around at like 238, 240. And when I was competing at 242, I was 255. So it's like, I can do the weight cuts. They're totally fine. I know how to do them well. I can coach them to shit. And it's like, okay, this is super easy. We can get down. We can not sacrifice any strength. But as I went through a couple injuries, and as I started coming back, I was just like, what's the point now? Like, I'm not at a point where I can push my PRs in those weight classes. So why am I trying to get down there, introduce other variables? I'm just trying to be a better version of me. So my philosophy on weight cuts is essentially, unless you're within like 3-4% of the weight class, like I'm 220, as long as I'm within 5 to 7 pounds, that's like a take a big shit and don't eat for 12 hours kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you're getting into that like 5% range, so that like 10 to 12 pounds, then you run a higher risk of performance issues when you recomposition, because it's not losing the weight that's the problem, it's gaining it back. So when you go from 255 to 242 or 240, I think my biggest cut was 243 to 216. Putting that much weight back on in one day is really hard.
Yeah.
And especially to do it without an IV. Like I wouldn't even advise people do it without an IV at this point. But it's really hard on your system. And then to go and try to be at your strongest the next day, it's really tough. So for me right now, I'm really just trying to be the best lifter that I can be in my current condition. I think that given where my training is at right now, I'm in a position to push for some PRs at 220 despite being so light. And so I'm just going to hang around here, like in that 225 to 227 range, depending on, some supplements and some dietary changes. But I typically don't advise any clients during meet prep to change their body weight. So if you're going to manipulate your body weight, it happens outside of meet prep. If you're going to lose weight, it happens in the off season. If you're going to gain weight, it happens in the off season, unless you want to gain a couple pounds during prep. But you definitely don't want to be dieting during a period where you're trying to showcase your maximal performance.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. My mind is blown.
Learned a lot.
Learned a shit ton today, and I'm sure all our viewers are gonna love this segment with you. Where can we get a hold of you, or where can they get a hold of you? Reach out, they want to coach like you with all this knowledge.
Sure. So You can find me on Instagram at Paul Oneid. And I also I just started an Instagram for my coaching business, which I've never marketed before. It's been running since like 2014, but is at Master Athletic. And then you can find me www.masterathletic.com. I also have an app that I developed with a friend of mine, Jay Mira. It's called MetriLife. It's a lifestyle monitoring app, and you can find that at MetriLife_ or www.metrilife.com.
Cool. Well, we'll
Awesome.
throw all those links up for you.
Awesome. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks,
No
brother.
problem, man.
Talk to you
Thank you.
soon.
Take care.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed our interview with Paul Oneid. I hope you learned just as much as we did. Join us next week on Two Guys, One Bench, where there's going to be shit talking, there's going to be Japanese, and there's going to be rants.
Yeah, you'll never fucking know unless you tune in. So tune in next week. And don't forget to eat big
Train hard.
and always be fired ready.
Two guys, one bench. Shit talking. Strict sports. Combat sports. Choices and consequences. Misfit. Resolute. Prepare yourself for battle. War smelling salts. Bottle sanity. Home gyms YYC.